As millions rally for unity in France, a closer look at the Charlie Hebdo attack as a sign of cultural disconnect. Survivors are the star in a multimedia Ebola awareness campaign. And a pop superstar drops hints about her upcoming performance during one of the most watched sporting spectacles on Earth. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. The United Nations is denouncing what it says were ruthless acts against civilians in the northeastern Nigerian town of Baga. The UN urged the Nigerian authorities on Tuesday to quickly restore law and order and create conditions which enable an investigation into mass killings of civilians in the town of Baga.
We deeply deplore the vicious, ruthless attacks against civilians in the northeastern Nigerian town of Baga, where Boko Haram has reportedly been operating since the 3rd of January. While the exact details remain unclear, what appears fairly certain is that mass killings and mass forced displacement have occurred. The deliberate targeting of civilians is clearly prohibited by international law, and we are very concerned at reports that there were children and elderly people among the victims.
Well, Nigerian military officials say that at least 150 people had been killed in clashes with Islamists in Baga, but the UN Human Rights Office noted that there were widely differing accounts. For some perspective, I am joined via Skype from Boston by Aminu Gamawa, an international lawyer, political commentator on African issues, and a fellow at Harvard University. Mr. Gamawa, welcome. And first question here is, what has been your thought on the Nigerian military handling of the issue of insecurity in the northeastern part of Nigeria?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I would like to say that I have been in touch with the people that have been directly affected by this violence. And the people on the ground feel really hopeless, helpless, and they feel abandoned by their own government and by the international community as well. So many people have been displaced, and it seems like the military is really not very transparent in telling Nigerians and the international community what exactly is happening in the areas either captured by Boko Haram or attacked by Boko Haram. As I speak to you now, based on the sources from the Nigerian military, Baga is still under the control of Boko Haram, but still the army is saying that the number of the casualties, the people killed, released by Amnesty International and other eyewitness accounts, has been exaggerated. So the military is always out there trying to downplay the scale of the violence of Boko Haram, which really hasn't helped in understanding the magnitude of the problem and in also responding to it accordingly.
Now, the question is, Nigeria is supposed to have the biggest military in West Africa and perhaps in Africa. Is it the capacity or the will to do it that is lacking?
Well, I think it's both. If you look at the Nigerian military has performed really very well in other countries through the UN and ECOMOG peacekeeping operation. But many years of misrule, mismanagement, and corruption, and of course a deliberate undermining of the military by the successive civilian regime so that they incapacitate them to prevent them from conducting coup d'etat, and the massive corruption in the military leadership has contributed towards under-equipping, under-funding the army. So,
now, very quickly.
The question is, yes, there is the human resource is there, but they lack the equipment. The troops on the ground, the combat troops, complain that they don't have the necessary equipment they need to fight Boko Haram.
In very few seconds, the kids that are being used, who are these 10-year-old children who are being blown up?
Well, it's not yet clear, but according to a recent investigation conducted by police in Kano, after they arrested one of the girls that was sent as a suicide bomber, she was sent actually by her father, who is a member of Boko Haram.
Oh.
So some of the sect members brainwash their innocent kids and send them into the suicide mission. Some of them have detonated themselves and killed people, while others, the attack has been foiled by the police.
Really sad. Thanks a lot, Mr. Gamawa, for sharing your thoughts with us today. Well, Aminu Gamawa is an international lawyer, political commentator on African issues, and a fellow at Harvard University. An Egyptian appeals court says ousted President Hosni Mubarak and his two sons will get a retrial in the embezzlement case that earned them multi-year sentences last year. The court in Cairo announced its decision Tuesday, a move that rolls back the only remaining conviction against Mubarak. The court did not say whether he would be freed on bail pending the outcome of the new trial. A lower court found the three men guilty in May, saying they embezzled about $17 million in funds that were due to be used to renovate presidential palaces. The 86-year-old Mubarak has been serving a 3-year sentence in a military hospital, while sons Allah and Gamal were each given 4-year terms. Well, a top Lord's Resistance Army commander who surrendered to U.S. forces last week will be handed over to the International Criminal Court, according to a Ugandan army spokesman. The spokesman says Dominic Ongwen will be transferred to The Hague by authorities in the Central African Republic, where he turned himself in on January the 6th. Ongwen surrendered to the U.S. military advisors who are helping a Ugandan-led force tasked with hunting down LRA fighters in Central Africa. The LRA is accused of killing and kidnapping tens of thousands of people over the past 3 decades. Well, funerals were held Tuesday, one in Paris, the other Jerusalem, for victims of last week's terror attacks in Paris. French President François Hollande led the ceremony for the 3 French police officers killed in the attack on the Paris offices of the satirical French magazine Charlie Hebdo. The attack on the newspaper was not the first such clash between the European media and militant Islamists. VOA's Al Person reports from London. Such incidents highlight a fundamental difference of values.
As thousands in France and many other countries gathered to mourn the people killed on Wednesday, they engaged in a little freedom of expression of their own. Some carried a cartoon reading, "Love is stronger than hate," while others held up homemade signs saying, among other things, freedom of the press is priceless. But not everyone agrees with that. This was the second attack on the Paris satirical newspaper. A Dutch newspaper's cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad caused protests in many countries and several violent incidents in 2005. And a Dutch filmmaker was killed in 2004 after producing a documentary about the treatment of Muslim women. Experts say the violence is part of a clash of values between the Western view of press freedom and traditional Islamic views, placing more emphasis on respect for authority, and particularly religious figures, and barring the use of the human form in art. Carol Kirsten is a senior lecturer on Islam at London's King's College.
When that is pushed to the limit provocatively in satirical media, it's almost a godsend excuse for radicalists to jump on these kind of matters.
But he's quick to add that the views of the militants do not reflect the thinking of most Muslims.
You could see it also today in the social media that a lot of Muslims admitted they felt offended for any satire that involved the Prophet, but they would never ever see that as condoning killing those who made these pictures.
Indeed, officials and religious leaders in several Muslim countries, including Libya, condemned the Paris attack. The murdered cartoonists of Charlie Hebdo and their colleagues engaged in a hard-hitting, no-holds-barred form of satire. They tweeted this caricature of the leader of the Islamic State militant group shortly before the attack.
I believe it's part of journalism. I mean, the cartoon is part of the tradition of journalism, going back hundreds of years, really.
Gavin Evans is a journalist and senior lecturer at the London School of Journalism. He spoke via Skype.
People who believe they are beyond having fun poked at them deserve to have fun poked at them. And I think that's part of this kind of cartooning.
Evans points out that Charlie Hebdo made fun of other religions too, and even lampooned the Pope. Now he's concerned that journalists will be more timid.
Any editor who has a cartoonist who is likely to depict anything relating to fundamentalist Islam is now more likely to be cautious because of this kind of reaction.
Some newspaper editors decided not to reprint the Charlie Hebdo cartoons about Islam, but for now there's no such timidity at London's independent newspaper, which had a front-page cartoon of its own with a message for terrorists so strong it cannot be broadcast. Al Pessin, VOA News, London.
Well, foreign ministers from 7 countries in the Intergovernmental Authority on Development have met in the Somali capital for the first time in nearly 25 years. The trade grouping talks focused on political and security progress made in Somalia, as well as the anticipated 2016 elections. VOA's Abdulaziz Bello has more from Mogadishu.
The high-level session in the Somali capital, Mogadishu, brought together top diplomats from the countries of Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan and Uganda. Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud welcomed the IGAD delegation and thanked the regional bloc for picking Mogadishu as this year's host capital.
This IGAD Council of Ministers session is significant because it is the first time IGAD member states at this level are discussing Somali political matters inside Somalia.
Security was stepped up in most parts of the city prior and during the meeting. President Mohamud thanked IGAD member states for assisting in the stabilization of Somalia. 4 members of the regional bloc have already contributed troops to the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM. The 22,000-strong AU force is mandated with assisting the federal government in its war against the terror group Al-Shabaab. Ethiopian Foreign Minister Tedros Adhanom, who is the chairman of the IGAD Council of Ministers, said that the IGAD regional bloc and the international community have both witnessed the progress made by Somalia in the past couple of years and reiterated their commitment to the country's security.
And this is not just recognized by us, by IGAD as neighboring countries, but also by the international community. And what's important now is to continue the march toward sustainable peace and development.
The top UN envoy to Somalia, Ambassador Nicholas Kay, said Mogadishu's successful hosting of the 53rd IGAD summit is a clear indication of progress.
It shows that peace and security is returning to Somalia. It shows that Somalia is returning to the community of nations. It is now able to operate as a full member of IGAD and host IGAD Council of Ministers.
Somali President Mohamud also thanked the international community and paid a special tribute to IGAD.
Following the positive development over the past 2 years, achieved with the support of our international partners, and in particular IGAD member states, we have to continue to work together towards the implementation of the agenda on the federal government of Somalia's political way forward.
An IGAD summit is expected to be held in Mogadishu later in the year. Abdulaziz Bello, VOA News, Mogadishu.
Well, the trial of the only surviving Boston bomber suspect, Zohar Tsarnaev, is set to begin near the end of this month. Investigators are trying to piece together how and why the Tsarnaev brothers, Tamerlan and Zohar, carried out the bombing. One area of interest is a 6-month trip Tamerlan took to Dagestan in 2012. VOA's Jeff Swiker talks with the Russian reporter Irina Godienko about her investigation in the region.
April 15, 2013, 2 bombs explode near the finish line of the Boston Marathon, killing 3 and wounding 264 spectators. Through surveillance video, police identified 2 suspects, brothers Tamerlan and Zohar Tsarnaev. Tamerlan would later be killed in a shootout with police. Zohar will stand trial in Boston, possibly in late January. In the search for why, many point to a trip Tamerlan Tsarnaev made to his native Dagestan in early 2012. Irina Gordenko, a reporter with the Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta, read a secret file in the Dagestan Interior Ministry on Tamerlan.
I had a source from Dagestani Interior Ministry, and during Tamerlan staying in Dagestan, law enforcement noticed him and surveilling him.
According to Gordenko's source, Tamerlan made contact over the internet with two known Dagestani rebels, a Canadian citizen, William Plotnikov, and a Palestinian, Mahmoud Mansour Nidal, on the far right in this photograph. Gordenko says Dagestan officials had Tamerlan's rebel contacts under surveillance.
I knew for sure that our security forces sent to America two requests about Tsarnaev. First, when they noticed him there, and they trying to find out who he is, who he was, and where he came from, and they sent a request, and there was no answer.
Gordenko says Tamerlan had several outbursts in the mosque he attended in the capital of Makhachkala, and was described as having an unstable personality. Similarly, Tamerlan interrupted services at the mosque he attended in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Ismail Feni with the Islamic Society of Boston said there were disagreements over the relevance of American holidays to Islam.
At both times we had sat down and spoken to him and made sure that the rules were very clear. A second time a little bit more stern about what needs to be observed and how it needs to be observed.
Several weeks after his arrival in Dagestan, both his rebel contacts were killed in counter-terrorism raids. Gordenko says Tamerlan noticed he was under surveillance and fled back to the U.S. She says it is unlikely he received any military training while in Dagestan.
This is a very ridiculous thing because in Dagestan they had never ever had any training camp in the mountain.
The question of why the brothers did it remains. Many hope evidence presented in Johar Tsarnaev's trial will shed more light on the brothers' motives. Jeff Swicord, VOA News, Boston.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered during the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54 and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, an Ebola awareness campaign trends worldwide on social media. Stay with us. Now, people with type 1 diabetes, usually diagnosed in children and young adults, must take insulin injections and watch their diet to keep their blood sugar levels balanced. Diagnosing the disease usually requires taking blood samples, a frightening experience for many youngsters. Researchers in the UK say they have developed a simple, non-invasive initial test which requires only a whiff of the patient's breath. VOA's Judge Putage reports.
It is estimated that each year as many as 80,000 children develop type 1 diabetes. The autoimmune disease can be lethal if untreated, so early discovery is of ultimate importance. One of the side effects of diabetes is sweet-smelling breath. Oxford University Emeritus Professor of Chemistry Gus Hancock says it is due to the buildup of chemicals called ketones in the patient's blood.
This sweet smell is this particular ketone which is given out. It's called acetone. And doctors have regularly smelt acetone on the breath of patients who are in the state of diabetic ketoacidosis and used it as a diagnostic.
British researchers say they have developed a portable breath analyzer that can detect even a very small amount of acetone in the patient's breath. CEO of Oxford Medical Diagnostics, Ian Campbell, says it was not an easy task because breath contains molecules of millions of compounds, while this test requires detecting only one of them.
What we do is we allow a subject to blow into the device, we extract out the volatile organic compounds we wish to measure, in this case acetone. The remainder of the breath passes through the device. We then release the molecule that we're interested in into the cavity to make the measurement.
Professor Hancock, who collaborated in development of the device, says similar analyzers exist but only as desktop-sized heavy boxes.
The aim that we have is to get this into a handheld device here that somebody can pick up and use by blowing simply through a mouthpiece.
Researchers say the new analyzer should be ready for doctors' offices within a year, while even smaller versions for individual use may be available later. But they point out the breath analyzer should be seen only as a first screening, and a diagnosis must be confirmed by a proper blood test. George Putich, VOA News, Washington.
Well, a campaign dubbed I Survived Ebola is generating a lot of buzz on social media. Last week, VOA's On the Line show featured the creators of the campaign, Sierra Leone's ambassador to the United States, and others on the front lines of the fight against Ebola. VOA's Paul Dio has our report.
Since December of 2013, when the Ebola outbreak began in West Africa, countries affected by the deadly disease have been working around the clock to combat the epidemic. The World Health Organization reports more than 20,000 people have been infected with the virus, and slightly more than 8,000 people have died from the disease. A campaign called I Survived Ebola is trending on social media, where Ebola survivors in 3 West African countries worst hit by the epidemic share their stories through a mobile application as part of a UNICEF-backed campaign to inform and fight stigma around the disease. Sean Southey is the CEO of PCI Media Impact, the creators of the campaign.
Helping survivors tell their stories, we think we're having a big impact. By sharing survivor stories in Sierra Leone, in Guinea, in Liberia, on TV, on radio, on print media, we're allowing actual survivors to inspire people to do the right thing and to challenge stigma.
Although many people have survived the disease, they still face a rejection from their communities due to lack of information and denial. Appearing on the VOA show On the Line, Bokari Stevens, Sierra Leone's ambassador to the United States, said the stigmatization of Ebola has done colossal damage on the streets of the 3 countries.
There's a tremendous amount of impact, apart from the stigmatization of it. I mean, the world today, we're all joined together by common commerce, transportation and things like that. And when you have like 4 or 5 transport companies, air transport companies, boycotting a nation, I mean, it's almost snuffing the life out of you.
The I Survived Ebola campaign is funded by the Paul G. Allen Foundation. Paul Allen is a U.S. philanthropist and a co-founder of the tech giant Microsoft. Southey says that survivors in Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia will be given smartphones to document their stories and exchange tips on how to cope with the disease.
The app is to help the survivors themselves tell their stories and connect to each other. It's a very simple app. We gave, with the help of a wonderful little NGO, globalgiving.org here in New York, each of the survivors a smartphone so they can talk to each other, but they can also share their stories over time.
2 survivors who have agreed to contribute include Kamara Fanta, a Fantalin from Guinea, who lost 6 members of her family to Ebola, and Deconte Davis, a 23-year-old Liberian who overcame Ebola. Ambassador Stevens says that his country, along with Liberia and Guinea, have made some strides against Ebola, but the fight continues.
We all have to coordinate our efforts and make sure that we eradicate Ebola from the basin.
The Ebola epidemic remains the biggest story on the continent and the largest epidemic in history, and the virus is still spreading. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, a pop superstar teases more details about her Super Bowl halftime extravaganza. We'll be right back.
you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines.
We want to reassure Nigerians that
the Nigerian military promises to fight back against Boko Haram militants who remain in control of the northeast town of Baga. In Egypt, an appeals court overturns the conviction of former President Hosni Mubarak and his two sons on corruption charges and orders a retrial. In Mozambique, the government declares 3 days of mourning after poisoned beer kills 69 people.
We're conducting
Finally, the University of Oxford researchers testing an experimental treatment for Ebola in Liberia.
That's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending.
Hi, I'm Katy Perry, pop star. Welcome to my halftime show testing facility. We're testing lots of...
Well, pop superstar Katy Perry says she's bringing a soft-serve sexiness to the Super Bowl halftime show, but doesn't want anything distracting from her music. The Super Bowl is an annual American football game that determines the champions of the National Football League. Katy was picked in November to play the high-profile gig following in the footsteps of recent performers, including Beyoncé and Madonna. Well, next up, if Frank Sinatra was still alive, he may well have approved of the Jet Set Hotel. But instead of singing Come Fly With Me, he might have sung Come Dream With Me. The Jumbo Stay Hotel, located just by Arlanda International Airport near the Swedish capital Stockholm, is a renovated Boeing 747, also known as the Jumbo Jet. It contains 33 rooms and 80 beds, ranging from budget dorm rooms to the luxury cockpit room, complete with its own bathroom. The cockpit room will set you back over $400 a night, but the more affordable dorm-style accommodations will only set you back about $60. And finally, the Telesur TV is reporting that Fidel Castro sent football legend Diego Maradona a letter written to quash rumors of the Cuban leader's death. Telesur is funded by Venezuela, Cuba, and other allied governments. Telesur is broadcast in state television in Cuba, where Maradona has been filming episodes of a television show he hosts. Maradona said that the 4-page letter discussed global oil consumption, the release of 3 of Cuba's intelligence agents by the U.S. last month, and the recent Latin American summit. And that is what is trending, and that is our show. Have a good night.
Welcome to the Voice of America's News Words.
At the presidential palace in Dakar, Senegal, U.S. President Barack Obama was welcomed by Senegalese President Macky Sall. Listen for the word that means two sides.
Bilateral talks covered a range of issues, from U.S. support for Senegal's democracy and infrastructure to joint security.
The word bilateral means having two sides. So bilateral talks are when the leaders of two countries discuss issues of joint concern.
Bilateral treaties are between two nations, and bilateral agreements can cover trade or other matters.
Now, when you hear the word bilateral, your English will be good enough to know what this news word means.